So I'm with Kate Churchill, who's the director for Enlighten Up, and congratulations
Thank you very
for
much.
the great premiere last night.
Oh, it was a fun party, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and I think people were electrified. I mean, I just had a ball just being there and watching the movie.
Thank you.
And the friends that came with me.
Yeah.
I think we all kind of left inspired.
Oh, that's so great. That was a really fun night.
So, why don't you talk about the story, the real story behind this movie, and how this whole project got started?
Sure. This project got started actually with an idea from the executive producers, Tom and Jean Haggerty. And they had gone on their honeymoon to Hawaii.
Yeah.
And they had met this really unusual yogi, a guy named Norman Allen, who was
Right.
there last night and was
Right.
in the film. And Norman had such a profound impact on them in terms of them witnessing someone who's really living their life aligned with his yogic ideals and practices, that they really got intrigued with the possibility of exploring yoga to a much greater degree than usually one can get at your local power yoga studio.
Right.
So they approached me at the time, and just said we wanted to a movie about yoga, and it took about 4 to 5 months before we got to the idea of following someone and who that someone would be, and it all developed over months.
So whose idea was it to follow a person rather than just do a documentary of all the great yoga personalities? And
Yeah, that was, once they approached me about looking at a story of yoga, I tried to start figuring out how to do it. And I wanted to figure out if we had a story that felt compelling enough to actually capture an audience, and potentially a theatrical audience. And in my mind, I wasn't interested in doing a survey of yoga and a history of yoga, or kind of looking at just different styles. I really wanted to try to develop a story that would have, a lot of human heart in it, and would appeal to a much bigger audience. Although with all that said, I think really the story that we made in the edit room wasn't initially the story that I was shooting in the field. So my ambitions of what I went out to shoot were different than the film we ended up making through a pretty long edit process.
so what was it that you were, when you first started? What were you?
Well, I had this idea that I was gonna find this guy who, is Nick.
Right.
Who, someone like that, and ended up being Nick, who'd never done yoga.
Yeah.
And we were going to go out and we were going to find some incredible teacher who, kind of instantly transformed both of us. But I was going to get transformation on the sidelines while documenting it and making this really dramatic film.
So what was this transformation? I mean, what was the expectation from this transformation?
It's a really great question, and I think I wasn't necessarily that specific about it in the beginning, and that kind of blindness around it about transformation or enlightenment or an enlightened being, just kind of feeling like I would know it if I saw it or we would find it. That kind of blindness drove me on and to making this film, when there were a lot of times where you could wonder how you could get anything done, and we really pulled off quite a lot of impossible feats. Like, we went to Mysore without even knowing if Pattabhi Joyce would let us film with him.
Really?
Yeah, and we went to India without a proper invitation. We weren't even sure about Iyengar. We had a vague invitation, a vague commitment. But when we arrived in Pune, the day that we arrived, we were told, "Oh no, sorry, Guruji's too busy, can't see you." And it wasn't until Patricia Walden showed up later that day that we actually got in to see Iyengar. So there's a lot that was just happened with
that's incredible,
blind determination. And I think it had to do with me actually not really being clear and specific what I thought I knew I was looking for, but just having an idea of it. So I kept going and going. And there was a strength and a big flaw to that as well.
So how did you pick Nick, and why did you pick him?
Yeah, so that's a great question, comes up a lot. When Tom and Jean and I decide, okay, well, we like this idea of following one person, we started to consider different people. And at one point we thought, well, maybe we'll follow a few different people and weave stories together. And then we started to think of, okay, well, who would be good, and what are what are their strengths, and we thought, oh, we definitely want someone who hasn't done yoga, and I wanted someone who would be really kind of resistant to yoga in a way, because I was so convinced that we were going to have a really profound experience that I wanted to, have a good arc. So, so Nick and I had met at a conference. I don't know, it was like 6 months, 8 months before I actually asked you to come on board, right?
Yeah, at least.
Is that right?
It was a while.
It was November, and then in May, of the following year, we asked you, right?
So you didn't like send out applications for people to apply?
No, we didn't do a casting call or anything like that. People
Okay.
later asked. I mean, we had I had a big board in my office of potential characters.
I see.
And Nick it was interesting, he kind of emerged because we were, he was working as a journalist at the time, and he was interested in getting into documentary film. And so he had been talking to me about, as a writer, what could he do, and had sent me a bunch of his writing samples, and I really liked his writing. And so we were kind of in communication about a totally different project when I started to think about, you know what, I really think I need someone who is going to be resistant, who's at a changing point in his life or her life, who can be articulate. And so at the same time as I was searching for that person, I was talking to Nick about a different project, and then I was like, oh, well, here's a guy, well, let's consider him.
And had you already left your journalistic career by then, or?
Well, I had gone through, I was sort of at a turning point, I think, because I actually hadn't been a full-time journalist for a couple of years. I had gone to grad school in New York, and I was actually working on Madison Avenue for this sort of political consulting firm, kind of media consulting firm, and I had just quit that job and was kind of traveling around Europe as a climbing bum.